Hello, and welcome back to Movie Husbands. Today we'll be reviewing our top 10 films of 2022. All right, Jeffrey, so this is our third year doing this, our top 10 films of the year. We have our champagne ready. We are ready to go. If you have not watched our videos before, what we do is we have our individual list of top 10 films of the year, so we do not know these films before. We haven't talked about them with each other. We will be live reacting to each other's lists.
It's a secret all year long.
And we always start with our honorable mentions. It's films that we wish could make our list, but alas, they could not because we can only have room for 10. So, Jeffrey, do you want to do the honors and start with your honorable mentions?
Sure. I just want to mention that there's some films that we haven't seen. Last year, we waited till like almost March to do ours. We took a different take this time, which is there are some movies that we just didn't see. It's very few, actually. We did pretty good, but we didn't see Babylon. We didn't see Avatar 2. There's a couple of foreign films that haven't been released around us yet, mainly EO and Close, that I really want to see. But I think for what has been released and what has been acclaimed and been on many other people's top 10 lists or has hit my radar, I've actually seen maybe the most this year out of any year that I've been tracking film. Any films you want to mention that you didn't see? Or
I think Women Talking we definitely didn't see.
Oh, yes, Women Talking. That's not out yet around us.
I think you covered pretty much all the bases.
You know what we can do, actually? We can update the comments. If we see a film from this year later, we can put our updated top 10 in the comment section. My honorable mentions: God's Country, We're All Going to the World's Fair, After Yang, Nope, Benediction, Smile, After Sun, All Quiet on the Western Front, The Fabelmans, and Marcel the Shell. What?
No, there's a lot, and I'm really upset. Why is Marcel not in your top 10? Well, I know, it doesn't have to
There's
be.
movies I like better than Marcel the Shell. It's a lovely film.
I am surprised by Nope.
A lot of film critics that I respect put that at their number 1 or 2 spot. And I think Nope is really great, but they see something in it that I'm just not seeing. I think there's probably a lot to it that's tied to film history. There's a lot tied to having a great conversation. Nope is a film that, I'm going to steal Mark Commode's words. He actually said this about Nope, that sometimes it takes your attention for granted, but it's a wonderful film to talk about. I'm not saying I'm holding that against the film, but in some ways I like talking about it more than I want to watch it a third time because I watched it twice.
Okay. And I'm also surprised by After Sun.
I think that other people had a really overwhelming effect that neither one of us had. I think it's a lovely film. I think it's incredibly well crafted. I think it's shocking that it's a first feature. I always say this every year about our top 10s, but these movies are basically all as good as one another. It's just your order of preference of, what you look for in film the most. That's really what these lists are more about, I guess.
All right, so you ready for my honorable mentions?
Yeah, sure. Tar.
Tar, yes. Tar, RRR, The Batman, Triangle of Sadness, and Turning Red.
Oh, funny. I really didn't like Triangle of Sadness that much.
I think the beginning and the end of the film I could do without, but the middle scene on this boat, this entire scene that happens when everybody gets sick and the way the scene devolves.
Yeah, it's hysterical.
It's hysterical. I think it's one of the best scenes of the entire year that I've seen in movies. It is so attention grabbing and it's so unpredictable. The way it just expands and blows up, I can't with that. So that enough put it on my honorable mentions list. Worthy of mentioning.
You want to explain why Tar is on your honorable mentions?
There is this emotional disconnection for me with that movie. And that's a big thing for me. You'll notice that in a lot of my lists. You'll notice it in a lot of my previous lists, or how I think about movies, is that there has to be an emotional tie-in that makes me feel bridged into the film.
Yeah, it's funny because one of my favorite films last year was Power of the Dog, which is a movie that you also appreciated, but it was also, I think, your number 10 last year.
Yes.
The same issue, I think, with Tar this year is that it's very intellectually dense and really interesting to talk about and think about, but maybe not super emotional. Although I would say feeling uncomfortable is kind of an emotion. That's a pretty uncomfortable movie.
It really is.
So my number 10 is Bones and All, which is maybe the first Luca Guadagnino movie that I've ever liked. I'm not a fan of most of his films. I think I find them meandering and take a really long time to get to the point. And once they get to the point, sometimes they're the thing you were thinking the whole time. I can't really say that about Bones and All. I thought Bones and All was really great. It reminded me of a mashup of a Jack Kerouac novel with an Anne Rice novel. It is meandering like many of his films are, but I think it is more episodic and a little interesting in its individual episodes. It's also the most gritty and gory and nasty I've ever seen Luca Guadagnino, but it has a lot of the warmth that's characteristic of his filmmaking. So I just thought it was a really cool balancing act.
So my number 10 film of the year is Fire of Love. If you have not seen this documentary and aren't familiar with it, it is a documentary that follows two volcanologists
Volcanologist, I think.
Volcanologist.
So yeah, you had the spelling right.
Volcanologist, people who study volcanoes. It's a husband and wife duo. And the cool thing about this documentary is it's kind of a repiecing of their life story and their love story because they are no longer alive. So I found just the way that this documentary is crafted to get across who they are as people, their love for one another and their love for volcanoes. This has some of the most gorgeous footage I've ever seen in a documentary, but the proximity in which they get to these volcanoes, the clothing that they wear when they get close to the volcanoes, they almost look like aliens.
I know, they look like, yeah, astronauts or something.
And for them, they are such unique personalities. They just stand out as people in this world you don't often get to meet.
Yeah, it's actually not on my list, but I think it's wonderful. It's narrated in a very kind of philosophical and astute way by Miranda July, a great filmmaker. So yeah, it's a great film. You ready for my number 9?
Yep.
My number 9 is Jackass Forever.
Every year you have one stupid movie. What was it last year?
Borat?
Yeah, it was Borat. And then this year
Borat.
is Jackass.
Or 2 years ago, maybe it was Borat. I don't remember. Anyway, Jackass Forever is awesome. I did feel a little weird putting it above After Sun and The Fabelmans and stuff.
Yeah, what is that about?
It's a wonderful movie.
Explain yourself.
Jackass Forever came out at this perfect time at the beginning of the year where we thought we were out of COVID, and then everybody got COVID during November, December. This film, I think, came out in January. It was one of the first things I saw this year. And it was just bursting with the energy of great friendship and people that care about one another and are also just resigned to be dipshits with each other for their entire lives. And it is the hardest I laughed all year. Like, it is just an utter joy to watch. It sounds weird to talk about a Jackass film in this way, but I think their personalities have oddly matured through the films. You know, they're almost 50 in this film. They're doing these crazy things, these crazy hilarious things, and just seeing them interact with one another and how much they care about one another and how much they're devoted to the gag is just great. And I've always been a fan of Jackass. I actually think this is the best Jackass movie. I think it's just a hilarious hangout session from beginning to end. It was harder for me not to put this higher, to be honest with you. This me showing restraint at number 9.
Don't get me wrong, I love this movie. But they are 50 years old, as you said,
Yeah.
and they are painting their dicks as Godzilla in a box set, and you put this over Fire of Love or After Sun or whatever other.
You know, Matthew, intellectualism and fun can exist in the same sphere, and that's why Spike Jonze produced this movie and has been producing Jackass since the beginning.
Not bringing up Spike Jonze as an excuse.
Spike Jonze made Being John Malkovich and Her, and he executive produces Jackass, so I'm exonerated.
I'm with you.
Did you expect that on my list? Or did you just forgot about that?
I forgot all about the movie. I forgot about it. Anyways, my number 9 film of the year is The Banshees of Inisherin.
This is my number 8, actually. So.
Oh, okay. So we could just talk about it in conjunction. One of my favorite things about this film is the mirroring of the war that's happening and the little war that is building on their little island. And so I just found all that to be so well craftedly done, especially the characters. The character development in this film, they are very simple people and simple characters, but they have so much personality to them. They grip you immediately, every single one of them. And seeing them all interact, I think, is just fantastic.
Colm kind of represents this intellectual side of your life, this existential side that I want to live a life of the mind, I want to write music, I want to read books. And Pedrick is more about, he wants to go to the pub, he wants to enjoy himself, he just wants to enjoy other people's company while he's here on Earth. So it's these two contrary philosophies that really can't coexist with one another, and that's why their friendship is ultimately falling apart. So I thought it was a really interesting film. I don't want to belabor it because we do have our review.
So moving into my number 8 film of the year, it is All the Beauty and the Bloodshed. It is fantastically pieced together in terms of bridging these two distinct stories about Nan Goldin's life, both as an activist and as her personal life, and how they converge into this very emotional conclusion that has a lot to say about society and institutions and the opioid epidemic. So I think there's just a lot here to be said. It's a very important documentary. It's very heart-wrenching, and I thought it was just fantastically pieced together.
My number 7 is Top Gun Maverick, which we haven't talked about on this channel before. We went to see this with our brother-in-law. We had a blast. This was like the ultimate theater experience this year. I know some people may say it's Avatar 2. We haven't seen Avatar 2. But what they did in this movie is insane. The footage, the action sequences, the flying sequences are absolutely crazy. But beyond that, if this film isn't a documentary about flying, all of the flying is put so nicely into the story. And the story is really emotive, it's really resonant. And it's really interesting because I don't care about the first Top Gun movie at all. Like, I think it's fine, but I have no connection to it from a nostalgic perspective. So how much I ended up liking this was really shocking to me. But I was so engaged with it from beginning to end, and there's so much to like about it. If Joseph Kosinski gets nominated for an Oscar for Best Director, I'm totally for it. I think directing this movie would be very, very difficult.
Yeah, I cannot imagine what it's like to piece together all those hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of footage. I saw in one interview just how many hours it was, and I can't recall in this moment, but I just remember being floored by how much footage they have from these flying planes. And yeah, just a fantastic movie, and I might have more to say about that in a bit. And so my number 7 movie of the year is Nope. I absolutely think Jordan Peele crushed it again. What's so great about him as a director is he's taking on these very unique and creative narratives, things that I haven't seen and done in film before. I mean, we've all seen alien movies before, but I think he takes this genre and he turns it into something that is more interesting and new and fresh. It's really stuck on this brother and sister navigating their lives past their father's death. And I think their unique ways of dealing with grief, as well as trying to capture on footage this alien so that they can sell it and make a bunch of money. I think it's a hilarious film. I think it's absolutely brilliantly shot. These night scenes are absolutely fantastic. And we've seen some of these set designs where they have the house outside and they have all this lighting perched above the entire house for the scenes where all these objects and blood are just streaming on the house.
Oh, yeah.
And it's
what
just
a great scene that is.
It's an absolutely fantastic scene, and I really enjoyed this movie.
I'm almost like having some regret that I couldn't get Nope into my list. You didn't mention either, but I think 2 of the best performances of the year with Daniel Kaluuya and Keke Palmer absolutely crushed it. Neither one of them seemed to be in the Oscar conversation, which sucks. There are so many other great people who are likely to be nominated, but I wish they were in the conversation.
Keke was electric in this movie.
Yeah.
And I was so ecstatic by her performance. I wish she, was a little bit more recognized during this time of the season.
My number 6 is Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Sorry. I kind of expected...
Are you having a twitch?
I expected it to be a little higher, but also Top Gun. We didn't talk about that, but I was expecting that to be higher because of just how fanatic you had been talking about it.
I've been talking about Top Gun fanatically?
Yeah, you've talked about Top Gun fanatically.
That's because it's crazy that it was made.
I know.
The way it looks is crazy. Those flying sequences are crazy. Anyway, this is one of the most talked about movies of the year, so I don't know how much I can add to it. It gave me a lot of faith in moviegoers that they were able to seek this film out and it was able to make 3 times its budget. And speaking of its budget, I think what the most remarkable thing about it is how it takes $20 million and it stretches it and it makes it look like better than a Marvel movie. It's just crazy. The amount of creative energy that the Daniels bring to this film. It has tremendous acting from Michelle Yeoh. Ke Kwan is fantastic in this movie. Stephanie Sue is absolutely fantastic in this movie. Jamie Lee Curtis seems to be dominating the Academy conversation, which is interesting.
What the hell?
I know.
I mean, she's great, but
I love her, but I'm shocked that it's at the expense of Stephanie Sue, who I think is just tremendous in the film. I could keep going on. I'm sure you'll have more to say about it at some point. It's a great film.
Oh, you expect that one. Well, we'll see. We'll see. My number 6 is going to be The Fabelmans. I know this is losing a lot of buzz in the conversation recently. I don't know what it is with Oscar season, and it's just like, this is fading into the conversation.
Yeah, like, there's a whole thing that, like, we could all, like Best Picture's over. Like, I know we have to do our jobs, but, like, Fabelmans is winning, right? And now that's just completely dying. I don't know what's wrong with film Twitter.
Anyways, that doesn't change how I feel about the film. What I love so much about what Steven Spielberg did with this film is that he made it so much more than just a generic autobiographical film. He told something about his childhood and his growing up, and not just how he learned about his passions, but he told it through the lens of childhood and through these experiences I think everybody can relate to. I also love how it told more of a story about his childhood and things he experienced outside of himself, being the relationship of his parents and what they were like, and the relationship of him to his friends or the people in school that were bullying him. All of those things culminate in a movie that had so much more to say about us as people rather than just Steven Spielberg learning to love movies.
Yeah, agreed. If we were doing the top 15 or top 20, this was actually my 11th spot. This was the one that I was most struggling to try to get on my list, and it just didn't work out. I liked it so much more than I thought I would. You know, it has a runtime that's about 2.5 hours, and it's really great the whole time, but it has some of the individual best scenes of the year. The climax of the high school story around the lockers at the end is really fantastic, a great emotional payoff. The last scene, where if you start to think about this too much, David Lynch is a personal hero of mine. David Lynch is playing John Ford, who's meeting with a young Steven Spielberg, being directed by the real Steven Spielberg. So like when you start thinking about that, it is very, very cool. So my number 5 is Speak No Evil, which is my favorite horror film of the year. I almost say don't watch this if you have a weak stomach or you get really affected by films, because this is a nasty one. And I don't even mean gory. It's not a film that's very gory. It's extremely uncomfortable, and it ends in the bleakest spot I've seen a horror movie end in a really long time. It starts out as a film that's basically a horror movie version of Curb Your Enthusiasm. It's about these two couples that are visiting one another. They don't know each other that well, but they met on vacation. They decide to become friends and visit one another. And one couple just continually pushes the other couple in all of these uncomfortable ways that kind of violate their social contract. As it moves forward, it becomes quite a bit more sinister and quite a bit more violent, and it is just vile. I'm never going to watch it again, but I was extremely impressed with the craftsmanship. I think it is absolutely one of the best made films of the year.
My number 5 movie of the year is Top Gun Maverick. We talked about it briefly, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more. I thought this was an absolute return of the summer blockbuster. And what film used to do back in the day was building these very exciting movies that just thrilled you and wowed you. And I haven't really felt that way by a blockbuster in a while. I think some maybe Marvel movies have hit that in a certain sense. I think Spider-Man No Way Home got there a little bit. But this movie was just a blast from beginning to end. It did so much more than it had to do, especially with the character development. It made it more of an emotional story, which I think is difficult to do considering you're piecing it together with all this footage of people flying planes in the air.
Yeah.
So I think building that emotional story around that type of footage, I think presents its own set of challenges. Being able to execute that in the way that they did was very well done.
So my number 4 is Glass Onion. We have a whole review on Glass Onion. I think it's wonderful. It is an absolute blast from beginning to end. I laughed the whole time. I love how Rian Johnson has made this into a franchise where each film feels a little bit different. The first film felt very classical mystery. This still has a mystery at the center of it, but it leans much more into satirical elements. So it feels very fresh, and it's also the best theater experience we had from a personal enjoyment perspective. We saw this in a crowded theater. People were having a blast, popcorn everywhere, week of Thanksgiving. It was just great. It's so clever, and I'm so surprised with how much we like the first movie that this one is even in the conversation of surpassing the first movie.
It is in the conversation of surpassing the first movie?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that for people. Benoit Blanc is the only character that has bridged these two movies and obviously bridges this series.
Yeah.
The focus isn't on him as much as it is the mystery and building that up and building these creative characters. I'll have a little bit more to say about that in a little bit, I guess. But as for my number 4 film of the year, it is Hit the Road.
Which is my number 3, actually.
Oh, awesome. So if you are not familiar, this is an Iranian film, but it is not distributed in Iran. And maybe it has something to do with the subject matter. It is about a family who is trying to smuggle their oldest son out of the country. So I think that politically might present its own challenges. I apologize if I'm pronouncing his name wrong, but Pana Panahi, he is the director of this film. It's this first debut feature-length film. I think this movie just has the wit and the humor and the banter between these family members that gives them this personality that I just can really latch onto and find something connective about. On a side note, there's a lot politically happening in Iran right now. There's a lot of filmmakers that are actually in jail for films that they're making.
Very famous filmmakers too, by the way.
Including his father. I think you had mentioned at some point he has a film coming out this year.
Yeah, he also made a film called This Is Not a Film, which was about him being locked at home. He wasn't allowed to leave his house because he was awaiting his sentence because he was in trouble for some other film he made. So he made a film basically on his iPhone, a documentary about him living at home under house arrest, and they snuck it out of Iran into the Cannes Film Festival, and it premiered there on a USB.
No
Yeah,
way.
Funny story. Yeah, his father has a very storied history with the Iranian government and constantly getting in trouble for the great films he makes.
I think for the past few years now, there's been an Iranian film on my top 10 list.
Yeah.
To not have the recognition in your own country, I feel like must be very difficult in a sense for that filmmaker, but also the ways in which they need to go to sneak it out of the country, as you just described, is pretty outrageous.
It's also why this film was primarily filmed in a car, because I guess the government is much less likely to snoop on you if you're filming in the car rather than you're filming in public somewhere.
It's unfortunate that filmmakers aren't being allowed to express themselves in a way that is more open and free and fair. But I think in terms of this movie, I found it visually stunning. I found it funny, witty. It was just absolutely captivating from the beginning to the end. And I love all these little pieces that are lurking under the surface. Very similar to After Sun, where there's a lot of things you have to pick out from the dialogue that mean so much more about what's happening between these characters. And I think it did a fantastic job following through on all that.
Yeah, this is such a great film. Has a wonderful child actor performance. Great family dynamics. One of the most realistic family dynamics I've ever seen, where they completely love one another deeply, but they constantly bicker and complain about one another. This film also takes a lot of chances visually. There's this wonderful scene where her son is finally getting to his destination. He's being taken away. And the mother, it's shot from really, really far away. So like an extreme long shot. The mother is frantically running back and forth between her son across this whole landscape to get something from her car. Her other son, the young child, is tied to a tree, screaming the whole time about how somebody needs to let him go because he's tied up. The father is on crutches and slowly crutching towards his son. So it's this moment where the heart warmth, the heartbreak, the hilarity, and the desperation are all colliding at once. And yet it's being shot from so far away, and that helps actually heighten the farcical element because you see this poor woman running back and forth. The way that this film balances tone is extraordinary.
This film also did that very well, was having all these static shots. One, I remember the chair. They had stopped at one particular location, and all of a sudden you just see a field, and you just see a chair moving through it. And then minutes later, you see the dog running with the chair dragging on it because the dad thought if he tied him to the chair, it would hold him back. The reveal is just absolutely hysterical. It's so funny and so brilliantly done. I can't wait to see more from this filmmaker. So my number 3 film of the year is Glass Onion. We did just talk in length about it, so I don't even know if I have any more to add. I think it's a very creative movie. I love how it's bringing back mysteries. I absolutely loved reading Agatha Christie novels back in the day, and I know that was inspiration for Rian Johnson here. I think he's doing a brilliant job with these movies. I am so excited to see more. We've talked about this in depth in our review, so if you want to hear more about that, go watch it.
So my number 2 is All the Beauty and the Bloodshed. And I'm actually going to talk about this in tandem with my number 1 film, which is Tar. Last year, my top 2 films were Power of the Dog and Worst Person in the World. I think every year my emotional pick is kind of contending with my intellectual pick. This year, my intellectual pick is Tar. I think Tar is wonderful. I've seen it 3 times. I have had 3 amazingly different conversations about what Tar is actually about with 3 different people each time I saw it. Todd Field is thinking about all of the different perceptions you could have at any given moment and heightening all of the ambiguity around them. And there are so many moments like that. There's like 2 every 30 seconds in this movie. It's crazy. So anyway, that's my number 1, Tar. All the Beauty and the Bloodshed is my more emotional pick, and that's not to say that it's not intelligently made or that it's not an intellectual film, but it's the film that I had the most overwhelming emotional reaction to this year. I'm going to echo everything you said before. It's just extraordinary. It's constructed with such skill and in a way that we talked about in our review that is actually pretty avant-garde from a documentary standpoint. We've seen some other documentaries this year that are really good, but they're very paint by numbers. This film really is a lot more innovative, a lot more intelligently made, and I think that makes it all the more effective.
All right, so unlike you, my emotional sense always wins out.
Yeah, 1 and 2, hyper emotional, whatever they are.
Hyper emotional, whatever they are. Number 2 is Everything Everywhere All at Once. It takes something from a creative aspect with a more financially reasonable aspect that's not just throwing money at a movie and expecting all this brilliant things to happen. And it's focusing on the characters, the story, doing unique things with the camera, and doing unique things in editing that absolutely triumph in this movie. It is funny, it is heartwarming, it is gut-wrenching. This movie captivated me for a second watch. after I had not seen it since early summer. It was in such a visceral way that I just can't even explain. I can't even put to words. If I did, that would be that this movie is a brilliant balance of love and humor and contemplation about existential crises.
And engages in a fair way with nihilism.
So I think this is the movie for nihilists.
Yeah.
Because it takes that and it says, okay, your life is worthless, now what?
And all the nihilists in my life seem really affected by this movie, actually.
Going from there, I think in terms of Daniels as a creative duo and a directing duo, is Swiss Army Man is one of my favorite films of the year in which it came out. And I think this film is much of a refinement of their approach to filmmaking. And it's taking these very absurd things and making them heartwarming, which is something that isn't easily done or achieved. Like this film, how the hot dog fingers is that stupid thing, and somehow you're just emotionally connected to it by the end. I think it was just a home run. I said that like I'm ready to go out to the ball game.
A bit of a sidebar, but they recently signed a deal with Universal. It's basically the same deal that Jordan Peele has, which is we give you money and you can make movies and you don't have to engage with IP, just make your creative stuff.
Oh, nice.
So it's really cool. I can't wait to see what they do next because I think they have a multi-picture deal with Universal to make what they want to make, and we're going to be able to see them in movie theaters, and they can continue to be a beacon of originality for a long time.
So I said this a few years ago in a different, I think in one of our top 10 videos. I think it was the year that both Jordan Peele and Greta Gerwig were on my top 10 lists. And I had said at that point that those two were filmmakers that I was super excited to see what they had down the pike. I'm not tooting my own horn anyway. I'm just saying that they are crafting material that is still exceeding that, and I want to add Daniels to that list. I am so excited to see what they have coming down the pike, especially since you said with that deal. And Jordan Peele and Greta, I know Greta's got Barbie coming out next year, which I am just so excited about. I don't know why I'm putting that in a top 10 film.
I can't believe Noah Baumbach has a writing credit on a Barbie movie. The Noah Baumbach that made Squid and the Whale and is just like, I hate everybody all the time, like acid tongue craziness. I'm excited for Barbie. I can't imagine him sitting there writing a Barbie script, but here we go.
Those three filmmakers, I think, epitomize this generation in a way that I am so excited to see more from them.
All right, you want to talk about Marcel the Shell with Shoes On?
Yes, I want to talk about Marcel the Shell with Shoes On.
This is your number one?
This is my number one film of the year. So Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, this movie is the sweetest movie I have seen all year. And it deals with these very adult themes of loneliness and solitude and grief in a way that's tied in this warming bow of comfort that I did not see achieved in any film this year, but also is just a film that speaks to me. This film takes what I would describe as childlike elements. It has a way of evoking a nostalgic sense of your childhood, sharing these revelations in the voice of a child that I feel like help you as an adult contend with a lot of the changes that you've gone through. I just felt comforted by this movie, and I also just bawled. It was the most difficult time I've ever had in a movie theater, not crying too loud that other people could hear.
I wish I had the recording of you like heaving when this
because I was holding it in. There was that one moment where Marcel is contemplating the solitude that he's having, and it's like 20 minutes into the movie, and I was just in tears. And also you could audibly hear other people in the movie theater dealing with the same thing I was dealing with in a way I've never experienced before. I think it touched little pieces of my heart that are rarely touched by cinema. And for that is my number one movie of the year.
There are so many films this year that managed to be everything everywhere all at once. But genuinely, a lot of films this year, I noticed this as a trend with the films that I picked for my top 10. They did such a great job balancing opposites, balancing all these different tones, weaving them together so perfectly that you feel like you're almost getting multiple films in one. So maybe that's something that we can leave this year with.
So that is it for our top 10 movies of 2022. Let us know in the comments, what were your top 10 films of the year? As always, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.